Most people imagine ancient stone circles as isolated ruins in open countryside, but Avebury completely overturns that expectation. In Wiltshire, southwest England, this Neolithic monument is so vast that roads, houses, and everyday village life now exist within and around it. At its core, Avebury is a henge complex, a massive circular earthwork made of a bank and ditch, containing an enormous outer stone circle and two smaller inner circles. It is the largest megalithic stone circle known in the world. That scale is not just impressive, it changes the kind of social world required to build it. You do not create something this large with a small elite acting alone. You need labor organization, shared beliefs, and a community willing to invest time over generations. Avebury matters because it is not simply an archaeological object. It is a place where deep prehistory and modern life overlap in the same physical space, forcing us to ask how human meanings are built, forgotten, reinterpreted, and protected across thousands of years. To understand why Avebury is special, it helps to separate what a henge is from what many people assume it is. The defining feature is not the stones but the earthwork enclosure, a large bank with a ditch inside it. At Avebury, this enclosure wraps around a huge interior where the stone settings were arranged. The monument took shape during the 3rd millennium BC, in the Neolithic period, and evidence indicates it was constructed over a long span, not in one single campaign. That slow build tells us something crucial. Avebury was likely not the product of one ruler's command but a sustained cultural project. Different generations may have added, adjusted, or reinterpreted parts of the layout. In practical terms, that means the monument probably evolved along with social needs, ceremonial practices, and local identities. Building itself may have been part of its purpose. When communities repeatedly gather to move earth, set stones, and maintain sacred spaces, they reinforce social bonds and shared memory. So Avebury can be read not just as architecture, but as a long-running process through which people made society visible in the landscape. The original purpose of Avebury remains unknown, and that uncertainty can frustrate modern audiences looking for a simple answer. But archaeology still allows strong interpretation. The monument's design, scale, and relationship to nearby prehistoric features point toward ritual and ceremonial use rather than ordinary domestic settlement. In other words, Avebury was likely built as a stage for meaningful action, gatherings, processions, social rites, and symbolic performances that helped communities structure their world. Monumental spaces like this can do political work without written laws. They create rules of movement, focus attention, and materialize shared beliefs in durable form. The two smaller inner circles suggest differentiated zones within the larger sacred environment, possibly for distinct groups or phases of ceremony. Even when exact beliefs are unrecoverable, we can still see how architecture organized human behavior. Avebury likely functioned as a place where social relationships were renewed and legitimized. That is why its unknown purpose should not be treated as a dead end. The physical evidence still speaks clearly about intentionality, coordination, and the central role of collective ritual in Neolithic life. Avebury also becomes clearer when viewed as part of a broader prehistoric landscape. Nearby monuments include West Kennet Long Barrow, Windmill Hill, and Silbury Hill, each representing different forms of construction and likely different ritual emphases. A long barrow points to funerary memory and ancestry. Windmill Hill, as an earlier Neolithic enclosure, suggests communal gathering and exchange. Silbury Hill, a colossal artificial mound, expresses symbolic power through sheer engineered mass. Together with Avebury, these sites indicate repeated investment in ceremonial architecture across centuries within the same region. This pattern suggests continuity of sacred geography, even if specific practices changed over time. People were not building isolated landmarks at random, they were shaping a connected ritual terrain. Movement between places may have mattered as much as activity at any one place, with journeys themselves carrying symbolic value. In this framework, Avebury is less a standalone puzzle and more a central node in a network of meaning. Understanding that network helps explain why Neolithic communities kept returning to this area, It was a landscape where memory, identity, and cosmology were physically anchored. By the Iron Age, Avebury appears to have lost its original central role, and the site was largely abandoned as a primary ceremonial focus. Yet abandonment in archaeology rarely means total erasure. Monuments of this size remain visible and influential long after their founding traditions disappear. There is also evidence of some activity during the Roman period, showing that later populations still interacted with the place in limited ways. What changed was not visibility, but cultural meaning. When the ritual system that produced a monument fades, later societies reinterpret what remains through their own beliefs and practical needs. Avebury's trajectory reflects that process, from active sacred center to residual landmark whose significance became fragmented and unstable. This shift is historically important because it reminds us that monuments do not carry fixed meanings through time. Their function depends on communities that recognize and maintain them. Once those frameworks dissolve, new narratives emerge, sometimes reverential, sometimes hostile, sometimes purely utilitarian. Avebury's long life is therefore not a smooth line of continuity but a sequence of cultural resets layered onto the same enduring earth and stone. In the early Middle Ages, settlement began to develop around the monument and eventually within it, creating the striking coexistence we see today between prehistoric structure and inhabited village. This was not a carefully planned heritage arrangement. It was the outcome of ordinary social growth, people building homes, routes, and farms in a landscape inherited from earlier times. As the village expanded, the stones and earthworks became entangled with daily needs. Some stones may have been treated as obstacles, others as useful material, others as objects of suspicion shaped by Christian attitudes toward pagan antiquity. This integration of domestic and monumental space is one of Avebury's defining characteristics. It also complicates modern preservation narratives. We often imagine heritage sites as clearly bounded zones separated from current life, but Avebury has always required negotiation between historical value and local practicality. That tension is not a modern problem, it is built into the site's medieval and early modern history. Understanding that lived entanglement helps explain both the losses that followed and the conservation challenges that remain. Avebury has never been a static ruin, but a continuously occupied cultural landscape. Many of Avebury's standing stones were destroyed in the late medieval and early modern periods, and this destruction had multiple causes. Religious hostility toward pre-Christian monuments likely played a role, as ancient stones could be framed as symbols of superstition or moral danger. At the same time, practical concerns mattered. Large stones could interfere with farming, settlement, or circulation, and breaking or burying them solved immediate local problems. This combination of ideology and utility can be devastating for ancient sites because it aligns belief with convenience. From a modern perspective, the loss seems tragic, but historically it reflects how value systems shift. Communities under economic pressure rarely prioritize distant antiquity over immediate survival and order. Still, the destruction was not total, and traces remained in buried sockets, fragments, and partial alignments. Those remnants later became crucial for reconstruction. Avebury's story here is a warning and a lesson. Heritage survives only when social attitudes, institutions, and documentation practices converge in time. Without that convergence, even globally significant monuments can disappear piece by piece within everyday local change. Before modern archaeology, two antiquarians played a critical role in preserving knowledge of Avebury: John Aubrey in the 17th century and William Stukeley in the 18th. Their methods were not equivalent to current scientific standards, but their timing was invaluable. They observed and recorded the site during periods when stones were still being removed or altered, capturing information that might otherwise have vanished completely. Their sketches and descriptions provided later researchers with reference points for reconstructing layouts and understanding scale. This illustrates an important principle in historical work: imperfect records can still be indispensable when they document evidence at risk. Aubrey and Stukeley also helped shift Avebury from local curiosity to subject of national antiquarian interest, which gradually supported stronger preservation attitudes. Documentation alone does not save monuments, but it can transform public perception and policy over time. In Avebury's case, early recording bridged the gap between active loss and later conservation. Without those observers, 20th-century excavators would have faced a far thinner evidential base, and much of what we now consider legible about the complex might have remained speculative. 20th-century work marked a major turning point in Avebury's modern history. Archaeologist Harold St. George Gray excavated the Henge bank and ditch, clarifying key structural features and construction evidence. Later, Alexander Keeler led extensive investigations and oversaw re-erection of stones to recover elements of the prehistoric plan. Keeler's interventions significantly shaped how Avebury is experienced today. They also raise enduring debates about restoration ethics, how much reconstruction is appropriate, what counts as authenticity, and how to present uncertain evidence to the public. Yet without these efforts, the monument would be much harder to interpret on the ground. Archaeology at Avebury required more than excavation. It required landscape management, interpretive judgment, and long-term stewardship in a living village context. The 20th century phase did not produce final answers, but it established a framework for ongoing research and conservation. New methods continue to refine chronology and landscape understanding, showing that heritage knowledge is cumulative and revisable. Avebury's modern form is therefore the result of both ancient construction and contemporary choices about how the past should be made visible. Today Avebury is managed by the National Trust, protected as a scheduled ancient monument, and included within the UNESCO World Heritage Landscape of Stonehenge, Avebury, and associated sites. These designations recognize global significance, but real protection depends on practical, continuous balancing. Avebury is simultaneously an archaeological site, tourist destination, spiritual location for contemporary pagans, and home environment for local residents. Each group brings valid interests that do not always align. Conservation authorities must protect fragile evidence while allowing respectful access and maintaining the viability of village life. Interpretation must be accurate without pretending certainty where none exists, especially regarding original function. This complexity is part of what makes Avebury so valuable. It demonstrates that heritage is not merely about preserving stones, but about managing relationships between past and present communities. Unlike monuments isolated behind barriers, Avebury remains embedded in lived space, making every management decision socially visible. Its continued survival depends on this negotiated stewardship model, where legal frameworks, public education, local cooperation, and ongoing research work together rather than in isolation. Avebury endures because it captures a deep human pattern. We build places to hold meaning, lose the meanings, and then build new meanings around what survives. In the Neolithic, the monument expressed collective effort, ritual order, and long-term social memory through earth and stone at astonishing scale. In later eras, it became neglected, contested, reused, and partially destroyed. In modern times, it has been documented, restored, protected, and reinterpreted as national and global heritage. None of these phases cancels the others, all are part of the site's biography. That layered biography is why Avebury matters beyond archaeology enthusiasts. It shows how culture is physically cumulative, how landscapes remember even when people forget, and how responsibility for the past is always a present-day choice. Standing at Avebury today means standing inside 5 millennia of changing relationships between belief, power, utility, and care. The monument's greatest lesson may be this: preserving the past is not recovering a frozen original, but sustaining an honest conversation between what ancient builders made and what modern societies are willing to protect. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.